So at this point, it gets real easy. I just encourage you, sit back, grab your pad and pencil or a pen if you're inclined, and get ready to take notes as we talk about everything business right here on the Weekly Business Hour. We're going to start the show off, as I alluded to earlier, with a very, very special guest. Mr. Hank Morris joining us today. Hank is one of the leading experts, in my opinion, business experts in the world today, in line with the great Peter Drucker, Tom Peters, Stephen Covey, and Edward Deming. All those people, you should most likely know their names. Great business leaders, great business thought leaders. Drucker termed Hank Moore's business tree, which is one of Hank's original ideas about the original business model of the past 50 years. Mr. Drucker called it the most original business model of the past 50 years. The business tree is his trademark approach to growing, strengthening, and evolving businesses while mastering change. And boy, we all know what change is about because it's all around us every day. So Hank, I can't thank you enough for coming and visiting with us today. Welcome to the Weekly Business Hour.
Glad to be back.
Well, you know, the thing about it, we're going to have this soup to nuts conversation, and our listeners, regular listeners, know what that means. That means we start in the beginning, and we go all the way through a topic or a conversation. And our conversation, ladies and gentlemen, is going to kind of focus on two books that Hank has released, The Big Picture of Business. They're available in 2-volume sets. You can find them on Amazon and different places. Wonderful, wonderful books. I encourage you to read them. They've got great information. They've got guidance. They're really, Hank, right, like a reference set.
They are. They're an encyclopedic set. There's going to be 5 of them altogether.
Yeah, you and I were just talking about that's amazing. Like you said, you started out with 2 and just information and guidance out there. So I encourage every small business owner, everyone who's listening, take a look at these books. I think they can help you meet the challenges of your business in a much better way. Well, Hank, currently, what are you involved in? You're always involved in some of the most interesting things. What are you up to right now?
Helping people to rekindle the excitement of their business. You know, when I go in and people go, oh, you've worked with all these great big corporations. Yes, I have. Marriott, Disney, AT&T, Texaco, lots of those guys. And they say, small business, in my opinion, is just wonderful. Small business people are the backbone of our society. 99.7% of all business starts. They have a higher staying in business rate. And one of the things I'm kind of re-anchoring doing after having spent the last 20 years at the corporate level, I do independent performance reviews of small business. Just charge them a nominal amount of money to get the kind of perspective that they're not going to get from a niche provider. What my role is and has been for a long time is to be the objective second, maybe third opinion to help them put into better perspective the things their niche consultants are giving them. I find myself a lot of times selling the worth of training, technology, branding, you know, because people who are busy doing those services can't sell the worth of what they're doing to management. Of course, what I try to make sure that management that I'm advising does is have their own strategic plan, have strategies that become the umbrella. So it's variations of what I've been doing for 50 years, but we've got, 5 generations in the workforce right now, and the younger folks are so eager to learn, so wonderful at not making the mistakes of the past. So it's not to go around pointing fingers that so-and-so did this wrong and bad and mean, and that's not it. It's to give people extra perspective than they're getting. So I'm kind of rededicating myself to small business, have been over the last 5 years, and then I have my second series that we talked about the last 3 times I was on the show, my Legends series. Point being, you can't live in the past, but you can learn from it. And given new coats of paint, the strategies of the old masters with your coat of paint become your next strategy. So that's kind of the excitement and I see so many wonderful small businesses that are, yeah, they're struggling, but they need permission to really succeed and really try something different. And I try to give it to them.
Well, one of the things that's interesting, in fact, it's a subtitle of your second book in the series, the Big Picture of Business series, Doing Business in a Distracted World. And I think you probably get 100% agreement or close to it
Yeah.
that we live in a distracted world with technology and things. One of the things when I thought about talking to you today and I read through this book, is what are your thoughts in general of doing business in the distracted world? As a small business, what do I need to be aware of?
Um, Everything that could happen if you weren't distracted. It's not enough to say to someone, just say no to distractions. There was a time that we had 900 distractions a day. And in today's paced world, we've got about 1,600. And those of us that are more enlightened, more involved, more sensitive to things get up to 3,000 distractions a day. So it's not enough to just say, turn the phone off, don't listen to the garbage that you hear on the internet. You have to rethink what people who were starting with a fresh piece of paper were thinking about their business. Like we do. I mean, I've been involved in 400 strategic plans. One of the first things I ask them to do is, who do you not want as your client? Who do you not want as your market niche? Because that's going to be a bigger source of distractions. So it's not just enough to tell people, stop being distracted. It's how to think outside the box, how to put it into action and move forward. No, the distractions are going to be everywhere. Then you get into the levels of distractions that we all create for ourselves. We have to be very realistic that we sometimes create our own distractions. The compatible chapter in that book is about rabbit holes, how we all crawl into those rabbit holes chasing business, and then it negatively impacts our ability to handle the business that we get. So everything has to be thought of in perspective, and it's how you shuffle those distractions, how you avoid some of the rabbit holes, and how you actually come up with some new creative ideas. They're in there. They're like diamonds in the rough.
Well, and let's talk about that. One of the things I think you're really good at in conversations, and I've read your books, is teaching, if you will, leading as well, people to manage change. Give us some thoughts on managing change in our businesses.
Well, research tells us that change is 90% positive. So why do people fight something that's in their best interest? Research also tells us that the average person and the average company change at the rate of 71% per year. Most often, because of distractions and going down the wrong rabbit holes, they become victims of other people's change. Another statistic, a chapter in that book where we talk about failure, I call it the fine art of failure. Research tells us we learn 3 times more from failure than we do from success. And what we learn from what we did wrong, more importantly, what we learn that our competitors did wrong, becomes our next great success. So again, it's being honest that we're human, we make mistakes. Being human is to fight change. Why, I don't know. But I mean, 90% is a good statistic of how it can work in your best benefit. So that's where the leadership comes in. That's where the planning comes in, is how to make the change work in your favor, and more importantly, in favor of your customers and their customers. And then you get into that whole stakeholder network. There are people out there that can really help people if they let them. Plenty of people that could hurt you, but it's how to navigate through the distractions to find levels of support. And one of the best ways of doing that is to reach out and help other people first. I mean, we are in a community of giving, of sharing. That's what I talked about the last time I was on the show when my book, Nonprofit Legends, came out. That was my second Pulitzer Prize nominee book. The current one is my third one, Big Picture of Business. And, you know, people want to give, they want to care, they want to share, but let's face that. None of us are in business to give all of our time away to charity, to give all of our money away. But when we do, we want to make it count. And that was part of what that book was about, cause-related marketing. I have a chapter in here in this series, The Business Leader as Community Leader. And that's one of the things that I learned from knowing a lot of the legends of business was they cared about each other, they helped promote each other's business, and everybody prospered. That's where we want to get back to.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I think there is a tendency, and I agree with you. I don't know why people shy away from change. And when you provide a statistic, which I had not heard before, like you said, of just the high rate of success from change, of what it really will make your business better. But that's where a plan comes in, right? If I'm willing to do the plan and then commit to follow it, maybe it psychologically helps me over the hump of being fearful of change. But let me ask you one of the things. We've got about a minute or so left in this segment. People tend to shrink back into niches and operate their business in a smaller and smaller niche, shying away from change, challenges, and whatnot. Speak to that, if you will, about what the dangers of putting your business in such a small niche.
Number one, whatever core business, your business, that's branch one on my business tree, where you start out as, because of change, you're never going to stay in that niche. Your marketplace is always going to change. And if you're really smart, you'll change and lead the marketplace. You'll go after internet business, international business, on and on and on and on. And the other problem with the niches is the niche consultants will only sell to the client organizations what they have to sell. That's a vendor mentality. Vendor, in my world, is a dirty word. We want to be thought of as providing solutions for problems, and more importantly, how to help the client evade the next level of problems before they happen. One of the topics that I also talk about and write about is crisis management and preparedness. Research tells us that 85% of the time, if you think through the crisis, if you plan for the eventuality of that crisis happening, then you'll avoid it. And that's what you're trying to do, is to avoid the trouble so you can stay focused. And then just the last part of that is understanding that the niches are important, but you don't want to sink into a false sense of understanding. You know, salespeople and marketing people see each other's as competitive niches. They're not. They're all under the greater umbrella of business development, which is under the even greater umbrella of the big picture of business. Same thing over on branch 4. You know, HR people are not the enemy. Training people are not the only solution. They need to see each other as best. And so that's what I'm hoping to accomplish with this series, is to put, 120 chapters of the best business outlook material available that's not in the niche books.
Well, I can appreciate that. It's very interesting. And I think that the comments you've made about niche is very important for people to hear. But crisis management, we're going to take a break now. When we come back, I want to take our next segment and really talk about crisis management, because often they just sink a small business. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us and we'll be right back with you.
It's All Business Talk on the Weekly Business Hour every Monday at 11 a.m. right here on Lone Star Community Radio.
Don't miss Lone Star Community Radio on TV and YouTube. Our talk show and music shows are featured on Our City TV, Suddenlink Channel 12, and have their own YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe to keep up with posted shows and comment on them below the video.
Is there someone you know who is hooked on vintage aircraft? Follow the Commemorative Air Force and its fleet of World War II planes, including the mighty B-17 Flying Fortress Texas Raiders, which is based in Conroe, Texas. Texas Raiders tours locally and all around the United States, offering the public a chance to put their hands on aviation history. What could be a more perfect gift than a flight on a historic B-17? Taking to the sky on the iconic bomber is an experience that will never be forgotten. For the touring schedule, reservations, or more information, go to b17texasraiders.org or call 855-FLY-A-B-17.
Not sure.
Listen in Mondays at noon to hear Conroe news from local nonprofits, businesses, upcoming events, Conroe Park events, news stories, and information that matters to you with your host, Margie Taylor of Taylorized PR. For more information about being a guest, visit irlonestar.com/Conroe Culture.
Not sure who to turn to when you have a problem in your business? Listen to the Weekly Business Hour on Lone Star Community Radio.
You are listening to the Weekly Business Hour, and this is Rick Schisler, your host, and we're having a soup to nuts conversation concerning the big picture of business with Hank Moore. Thank you for being with us, and remember, your company can sponsor the Weekly Business Hour. It's real simple. Just drop me an email at that's the number one, bestconsult@gmail.com. Well, Hank, when we went to break, we just barely touched on crisis management. Well, what an important topic. I have been called in to consult with people who are in crisis, and crisis, the statistics in the Small Business Administration bear it out. They many times will sink a small business for various reasons. So let's address crisis management. I mean, let's talk about what causes crisis in business. Start there.
Living in la la land, thinking that the crisis is never going to beset you, looking at other people's crisis and thinking, well, I dodged the bullet. But a crisis for a small business is not the same thing as a crisis. It's not a plane hitting a building. It could be the downstream effect of, look at all those businesses on the ship channel right now, and the restaurants and the retail, and they were all basically put out of business because of someone else's crisis. A crisis in a small business could be a sexual harassment lawsuit. More commonly for a small business is two of their customers merge and they've suddenly lost opportunities that they then need to. A few years ago, I was speaking on the subject of crisis management, and I'd given examples that I'd been involved in with the biggest name crisis that I was ever involved in, advising the client through, was Tylenol back in the 80s. And people would say, gee, I'd love to know what they talk about when the crisis hits. What we talked about was how we were going to pull the plan that we had already developed off the shelf and make it happen. And a crisis plan can be part of a strategic plan. That would be the first soup to nuts takeaway today, is that everybody listening decides they're going to develop a plan of action for their company, looking at branch 1, core business, branch 2, running the business, branch 3, financial, branch 4, people, branch 5, business development. If they look at those 5 parts of the business tree, then they predict a crisis in each of those 5 areas that could happen. Then what they're really doing is category 6 and 7 on the business tree. Trunk of the tree, which is understanding the relationship of all the parts to each other, and then roots of the tree. Where are they going? How are they going to get there? Anyway, I was up in the Midwest, and I was speaking at an agricultural conference, and these farmers came to me and they said, we're mad because the California cows have stolen our business, and we want to develop an angry Keep the Cows in Wisconsin campaign. They thought a branding solution was the one and only that they could do. And I said, no. For one thing, you don't want to be negative and angry. For another thing, you don't want to attack the California Farm Bureau for being creative and developing business. You need to make the Wisconsin brand famous worldwide. And you want to use the burgeoning internet as a way to market your products and services worldwide. That's what they did. Now, did they do it because somebody from the outside said, you guys need to get your act together? No. I cited precedent. I learned from my friends who were lawyers, always set precedent and cite what someone else did creatively. The reason I tell my case studies to other groups is that they'll learn not to make the other mistake, thus avoiding the crisis, thus creating the new opportunity. And that just gave me an idea for another chapter in one of those future books, The New Opportunity. All it comes from doing is looking at the things you did before successfully, at the things you might have done. One of the questions that I ask businesses when I go in and do these small business institutional reviews is usually, knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently and how would you have done it? And that's it's a simple thing to look at. The answers to success in business are right in front of all of us, but we just kind of need to shift our focus here and there and maybe talk to more people. Consultants don't have all the answers. People working in the organization. I love to go in and I'll be brought in as the so-called expert, but I love saying, you like that idea that I just gave you? She gave it to you, that lady across the room. You got some wise people on your staff, and they don't even know how wise they are. So that's the new opportunity. The new idea is simply looking at what you've got and respecting more what you have to work with.
Well, and that's something I would call like playing to your strengths, and be sure you inventory, if you will, the strengths that are within your own business and within yourself as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, how may a business crisis be averted in the future? I mean, planning, is that the key? Is what
Gotta
you seem to
be.
allude to?
Yeah. Research tells us, most of these statistics that I'm using are from Harvard Business School. Only 2% of the businesses in America have a plan of any kind. Is it any wonder that the others fail? So the secret is to do a plan this year. It could be a 2-page plan. Then you turn around and share it with your stakeholders. That's your category 6, people in your world and outside of your orbit who could help you. And then you get very strategic about what were those mistakes we made and what could we really have done differently. And it's amazing when you give people an opportunity to think, strategize, then they get into the habit of doing that the second year and the third year. Strategic planning is not something you just stick on a shelf and forget about. You update it every year.
Well, and obviously that makes a lot of sense. And if I'm in a small business and I have 10, 15, 20 employees, 50 employees, and their involvement, if I can involve certain ones and then spread it to the rest, then I'm drawing on that strength of my employees, which is a win-win.
Yeah.
It's training. Basically you're training people to think a little bit different, and the end result is they're going to offer more to you.
Research tells us the American workforce needs 3 times the amount of training than we're presently getting in order to even be competitive, much less to move forward. Training defined as not just roles and skills, but as thinking, strategizing. We've got so many great people out there in the workforce that want to do a little more. When I go in and talk to CEOs and I say, what do you think are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? Often what they're seeing as a threat or a weakness is a strength. Oh, well, we have all these people working for us and they're so headstrong, they've got all these ideas. And I go, that's not a bad thing. You need to bottle that. Those people are your heir apparents to your future. And so, you're trying to avoid the next crisis. There's always going to be one. I'm already predicting the next recession, 5 years. What's going to stave it off is small business. It's going to be staved off because small businesses, kind of everyone who works in the company has to count. Every strategy has to be at least tried, then measured, and then improved upon, whereas some of the bigger companies are a little less reluctant to do all of that.
Well, there's no doubt it's hard to turn a bigger ship, and I agree with you. Small businesses right now have got a lot of room to run and grow, in my opinion. Well, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we're to the end of our time today with Hank. He'll be back next week, and in the following week, got a 3-part series on soup to nuts conversation about the big picture. Hank, if someone wanted to reach out to you or learn more about you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, my website is hankmoore.com. They can send emails. They can contact me at hmoore@silverfox.org. And there's a wealth of other people that can be contacted through Silver Foxes. People get their business advice from a variety of sources, sometimes right, sometimes wrong. There's no substitute for having a good mentor, a good senior advisor, not a vendor, not somebody that you kind of sort of heard said something once upon a time. You need someone to help guide you through. Then you need these folks want to trust their own judgment. People are bigger picture acting and behaving than they think they are, but there's just so much great opportunity out there. It's just thinking a little bigger and a little broader and bringing in the people to help you accomplish your dream.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. My little moniker is common sense business experience. That's what I bring to you. Well, Hank, you and I talked a little bit earlier today about, on our first segment, about crisis management. I'd like to take a little deeper dive into that if we can. One of the things is, how many different types of crisis are there? I mean, I mentioned when we touched on it briefly earlier about some people manage on a crisis basis day to day, and that's not what we're really talking about, is it?
No, I mean, the crises have to do with keeping the crisis from happening. I mean, a crisis for a small business can have to do with the core business. Things have changed, their marketplace has changed, and they're maybe not willing to admit it. And then the rest of their business may be running just fine. It's just that, it's going to be different for every business. A crisis isn't just the same thing. For example, a small business is going to lose market share. It's from the very beginning. Once you're successful, there's only one way to go. That's down, unless you think past the next crisis and you move it around. And in this era of companies combining resources all the time, they've just got to think a little more outside the box. They don't always.
Well, and the thing interesting again, and I mentioned this just briefly earlier, and it's always been a major concern of mine of working in the small business world and then mentoring and advising small businesses, is a lot of these crises, we know the potentials there, such as I mentioned, storms here in the Gulf Coast area, but we don't do anything, or we do very little to prepare our businesses for the inevitably you're going to have, or you're going to be affected. It may be a big effect, such as the business flooded. I had a client whose business flooded in Harvey, yet they were back in business within 24 hours. They happened to be an IT support firm, and all of their clients scattered all over Houston, not one of them was down for 1 minute other than internet interruptions, which they have no control over. But they had prepared their clients as far as the IT part of their business to
Yeah.
be continuously available, which I thought that was a great milestone for that business to do that.
And those kind of businesses that are in the logistics business, their whole thing is not letting somebody down, always being there now and in the future. One of the crises, the more I'm thinking about it, there's the kinds of crisis. The first ones are from doing nothing. I wrote a book about that years ago called The High Cost of Doing Nothing. And it takes the premise that American business spends 6 times more than it should every year cleaning up mistakes. There's that much inherent in the system. And there are whole professions, can we say, environmental remediation, people like that. Their whole reason for being is to take care of inevitable crises that happened when you do nothing. And then the next level of crisis that frequently happens in business is just doing everything the way you've always done it. I made the observation, I've had 5,000 clients over the years. Some of them are very large corporations, many of them small businesses. And after the recession of 2008, 2009, a lot of businesses, I made the observation that maybe 25% of those that went out of business probably should have, because they were already obsolete when the crisis struck. Same thing for Harvey. It's the good ones that realize that they're in the business of being there for their stakeholders always. Then you get into the crises that businesses bring on themselves. They'll try to cover up a lawsuit. They'll try to cover up an incident that occurred. They'll diss the wrong customer who then goes on the internet and posts bad things. It's kind of like things of their own making. Then you get into crises that occur due to no fault of their own. They're losing suppliers. One of the worst things for a large small business is to realize that everybody that they use as a vendor, as a supplier, as an outside resource needs to have the same commitment to standards, because those people outside of our purview are going to say and do things that are totally wrong. And then you get into the crises that occur through bad work, poor workmanship. What percentage of the products that you make is defective going in? What percentage of this of the the pills on the market are tainted? When I worked back in the 1980s, I had a client, Johnson & Johnson, and we had the Tylenol tragedy, where a handful of pills were contaminated by somebody bad who was trying to cause some trouble. But the way we worked that crisis was to modify what was going on, recognize what we needed to do. Then we immediately started going and trying to rebuild confidence. One of our top publics that we were after was the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. We tried to leverage the positive, proactive, concerned coverage that we got by the media. Oh, these people are good people, and they're trying to, what we were trying to do was just get our future objectives. We utilized the attention to get the tamper-proof caplet introduced by the FDA, who we had been fighting. I say we, anytime I talk about the client, it's we. We'd been fighting them for 3 years to get the tamper-proof. Had the tamper-proof caplet been approved, we tried in the media coverage not to go out and say, we told you so. If you'd only let this happen, we tried to do it in a responsible manner. And would that other companies would do that. At the time, it was the right thing to do, and it set examples for good crisis management. When you see recent crises, can we say spills of chemicals on the Houston Ship Channel? Can we say bad handling of transportation companies who ruin lots of product? And for them to just say, we uphold great standards, show us that you do it. And there's no substitute for communicating back with your stakeholders. And a small business, let's say they have a crisis of some kind during the year. The way they write that letter to their stakeholders of this is how we believe we responsibly handled the crisis. So it's all those kinds of things. What, of course, magnifies the crisis is when a company does nothing, the wrong things, they lie, they say, oh, well, no, we're fine in every way. One of the things that perplexes me as an expert on business and crisis management is when I see these statements posted on TV. We always adhere to this, that, or the other. They never address how they handled the current crisis. Those companies who will honestly communicate, this is what we saw, this is what we learned, this is what we did. That's what Johnson & Johnson did with Tylenol, and that's why the Tylenol case was in such a good example. Shortly after that tainted product case, I had another client of mine, Girl Scouts of America. Well, when you tamper with Girl Scout cookies, you're tampering with America. And we were able to contain and codify what happened. It was through that process I learned that every flavor of Girl Scout cookies is manufactured by different factories in different locations, most of them women-owned businesses. That's a good thing. But what I learned is how you respond says volumes about your future to go off and do business.
Well, and there's no doubt about that. But let's back up for a second. Okay, I'm listening to the program today. Give me an idea of how to put a crisis management plan, preparedness plan together so I can, after the show, take some time and identify potential crisis, look inwardly, as you mentioned, like bad workmanship. How do we put a plan together?
It's a part of the strategic plan. It should never be done. It's the same thing that happens when companies run into, some crisis having to do with ethics or diversity. All of that is part of the strategic plan, and it's labeled as such, the crisis portion of the plan. The foolhardy thing to do is to write a plan that never acknowledges what the crises can be. So you predict in each of the major areas, core business, running the business, financial, people, and business development, and then where the organization is going to go, who it's going to work with outside. You need to address all of that. You need to have deadlines. People talk about a strategic plan. Is a strategic plan a mission statement? That's usually the last thing you write. A mission statement in $3 will buy you a cup of coffee. It's not the main part of the plan. It's the executive summary after the fact. You need to really look at your goals, your objectives, and your tactics. The tactics, seemingly the bullet point, within the plan is the most important part of the plan. And if you really look at your tactics and how you're going to measure, how soon are you going to respond to every crisis? And that could be a disgruntled customer service call. Every customer service call will be answered within a period of X number of minutes or hours, not days. So it all comes down to setting timelines, setting accountability to where everybody involved in the process is going to be held accountable. It's one of the things that my friends in small business, why I admire small business so much, and I feel the same way about nonprofit organizations, because they're small business like also. Everybody has jobs. Everybody has responsibilities. Everybody plays a role in the crisis. It's not like you've got large hallways full of people that you can shrug it off and say, oh, that's someone else's problem. So the secret is to make everybody accountable for their part of the crisis within budget, within timeline, and within safety standards. I mean, you need to address all of that in the plan.
And it's all custom because it's every business, every industry is different, I would assume. Just for a second, let's point out to people, and I look at this as an encouragement, but in your opinion, what are some of the liabilities on a company for not handling their crisis properly? Okay, I've got a workmanship issue. We can take something real simple, a small business, where I've got a workmanship problem and I send product out and it's defective. What are some of those liabilities that I could face as a small business that I need to really think about as I work through this process?
They're going to lose market share. It's going to spark lawsuits. One of your measurements of a good effectiveness crisis preparedness plan. I'm not just talking about crisis management now. It's crisis preparedness. And one of your goals is to avoid lawsuits and understand what they could be to know what you're going to avoid. The other thing about the costs would be what are going to be your costs of cleaning up bad work? What about rework? How many times do you have to go back to the customer and say, we messed up again, sorry? How many sorries will the customer accept before they go elsewhere? And then you get into the damage control issue. You know, damage control is not shrugging your shoulders and looking the other way. And that, frankly, is what happened with some of those chemical spills on the Gulf recently. It was too easy to say, we're looking into it. That's not an action. That's a rationale. And then you get into what your recovery and restoration is going to be. Are you going to have to rebuild structures? Are you going to have to rebuild economies of neighboring cities? You know, we're going to be seeing lawsuits coming out of those programs for many years to come, unfortunately. Then you get into the retooling. You know, when you reconstruct a business after Harvey, a natural disaster, or after a financial meltdown, as we had in 2008, 2009, your costs of rebuilding are going to be infinitely more than just restoring. In the book, Big Picture Business, actually in volume 1, there are 3 chapters that address those issues of how the economy had to transform and reorganize itself. And it was more than just, you know, bailing out the auto industry. You know, it wasn't just a simple, if you do this, all else will be well. You had to talk about the trades professions that were really hurt as a result of that. So there's a domino effect, and you think of your worst. It's what I frequently say is you prepare for the worst, you can expect the best, but if you've prepared for the worst, you're going to come closer to getting to your ideal opportunity. And then you get into those opportunity costs. What about lost business? Let's say I made some observations of during Hurricane Harvey. What about that lost inventory that all those auto dealers had of flooded out cars? How many of those got palmed off on unsuspecting people later? Maybe not through them, but through someone else. And what about those companies that kept their employees on the payroll until such time as the business could recover? That's good. That's the right thing to do. That gets you good reviews on the internet when you do that. But it really is the right thing to do if you're going to stay in business. You know, there's 4 kinds of businesses, and you recognize that the crises are a little different for each of them. Number 1 is you create a new mousetrap. You've got a service that no one else has, and you're going to really push forward and do your best job. Then you get into that second category of company that's going to take what the mousetrap inventor did and take it further. You know, there's companies, there's a well-known restaurant chain, Pappas. They take other people's restaurant concepts and they make them really good, and they keep the customer service, and they're doing a lot of the right things. And then you look at whose ideas they took and amplified upon were the mistakes of others. Then you get into that third category of companies that aren't supposed to be around forever. You know, we're nurturing an asset for a certain number of years so that we can sell as a roll-up. I had a client a few years ago. They were a chain of ambulatory surgical centers. And we were basically preparing them. They thought of themselves, I thought of them as a Category 3 company. And we were putting a chain of them together. And the more we got into it, we were going to sell to a company called Health South, which started having corporate crises. So we thought, fine, we'll keep the asset. We'll acquire other companies. We'll do a roll-up. We'll go public. And we took them public as Orion Healthcare. We took potential crises over the company we were trying to sell our company to, and we turned it into a positive, and we kept it, and we held on to it. And then that fourth area is companies that, how shall I say, they're not real companies. They're ideas, they're concepts. Some of these internet companies that you think you're doing business with are roll-ups of other ideas taken from someone else. There's room for all four, and there's crises that can occur with all four. One of those Category 4 that I just mentioned is one of these online network providers, and where they got into trouble recently because the vendors that were providing the services, they're an online app is what their business is. They're a marketing company. But they started getting a lot of grief for the providers of the service that they were advertising. And then what was the real crisis? Their stock price plunged. Can we say Uber? There are a lot of current examples where you don't necessarily have control over the downstream crises, but you sure get the grief for other people creating them.
Well, and that's a function of connection and how much your business is connected
Yeah.
to outsiders where you don't really have that much control. I want to touch on briefly, even though we're in great economic times as we sit here, at least in America, that's what we're told and what the statistics bear out. Downturns come. It's a function. It's always in motion, in my opinion, up and down, or as my dad used to say, like a clock, back and forth, back and forth. Right now we're in an upturn, but downturns come. Can we just touch on briefly what lessons should we learn carrying forward and remembering so when the next one comes, as a small business owners, what are some of the key things we need to remember from the downturns of the recent past?
That they're always going to keep coming back, and that the worst of times bring out the best. One thing you could look at in Hurricane Harvey is that people came together, they supported each other, not just from a community nonprofit perspective, but from a business perspective. A lot of businesses helped and mentored other businesses. And it would be nice, it's like every year when it's Christmas, we say, why can't it be Christmas every day? We say about the economic downturns, why can't we look at each other as a community of businesses rather than a bunch of competitors that we're out to get? That's one thing we need to think about. As I said, the next actual recession is coming in about another 5 years. I don't think it's going to be as bad as the 2008, 2009 because of, at least the economists will say that it's not as bad because a lot of safeguards are in place for communities of businesses to help and support each other. If I had to wave a magic wand, I'd like to give some hero awards to local businesses for thinking of each other as a business community. I think it's wonderful when people get active in chambers of commerce and networking groups. We were in a position before events of a couple of years ago where a lot of chambers and networking groups, membership was shrinking. I'm not talking about Conroe, I'm talking about other areas. And what happened as a result of people rolling up their sleeves and seeing each other more as a community of businesses, that people started getting re-involved with business networking groups, re-involved with chambers of commerce. I think that one of the best investments people in business can make is to occasionally reach out your hand and help someone else. None of us are in business to give all of our time and resources away, but when we do, we want to make it count. I would love. I've recommended to small businesses to have a little spot in the bottom right-hand corner of their website to pay tribute to their shareholders, to their stakeholders, to their communities. When they do things in the community, it's not bragging if you've really done the good guy work. People like to do business with people they trust.
Well, and I think, yes, and that's an important point you make because of building that trust through the community. But back to what you said, I want to make sure people picked up on that, because the idea that you build your place in the community now so that when the downturn occurs, you are connected through a chamber of commerce, through other groups, through other businesses, so you can work with each other and help each other through those times. Well, let me ask you this. It's kind of changed direction a little bit. Businesses go bad. I mean, the business, and we've talked about some of the causes of that today. What are some other reasons that businesses just go bad?
There are about 17 to 20 of them. A lot of times you can line them up with those elements of the business tree. They're in the wrong business at the wrong time for the wrong reason. They're underfinanced. They don't have the plant resources and management. Their technology is way beyond out of date. You know, technology is a term that a lot of us embrace. We love it. But technology by itself does not transform business. It's what we do with it. Same thing with training and leadership and those other wonderful programs that unfortunately businesses cut. One of the other reasons that really makes companies go bad is when they start making systematic cuts in the budget without understanding what they're cutting. What do they cut the most often? Branch 4, people. Should be 28% of their emphasis in their business, but what do they cut? They cut the training. They cut the benefits. They cut all the stuff that keeps people loyal to the company. In the current economic environment and low unemployment that we are enjoying in this country right now, good employees that are going to be loyal to Company X and Company Y and the others are getting fewer and further between. So it's what you do to make the situation where they wouldn't even consider going to work elsewhere. You know, I mean, research will tell you that, or at least it told me that companies whose employees are occasionally allowed to take off work and participate in chamber activities, and that is work. That's part of work. People say, oh, you know, going off and being in a charity fun run on the weekend, that's not work. Yes, it is. It helps you represent your company. Companies that have employees that are allowed to do those things, their productivity and their loyalty, according to Harvard Business School, increases 2 to 3 times. So what's wrong with giving them a little latitude? Bigger corporations, and I've set up what we call heir apparent programs for mid-managers who will then be aspiring going into the top leadership. In the heir apparent program, you make assignments of which charity you're going to work with, how you're going to be visible in the community. I had a client years ago, some people may have heard of, called Texas Commerce Bank, and their chairman, Ben Love, was a friend of mine. And he came to me one time and he said, there's this guy on my staff and he's going to be running the show someday. Would you kind of meet with him and mentor him? And his gift to Mark Shapiro was having me there mentor him. And one of the first comments I said was, we need to differentiate you in the community from Ben Love. He's the champion of the arts and education. You need to be the champion of inner city revitalization and this, that, and the other. And I wrote his first 3 or 4 speeches that addressed those issues. He grew into the role, and now he's vice chairman of the board of Chase Bank. I'd say he's done pretty well. But it's because you saw these strategic resources in the company to be the heroes and pave the way for the other people. Whereas going back to the crises, when the wrong things are done and people see bad behaviors, that kind of gives them permission to be bad also. We all do what we're modeled. We all aspire to be what our mentors told us or didn't tell us. It's better to tell people the positive stuff. And that's the reason why you do this, is to cut the losses. You're trying to keep those 6 coins from stacking up. High cost of doing nothing, by the way, is an average that businesses will spend an average of 6 times more every year cleaning up problems. Now, if you did a lot of these other things, you keep those coins from stacking up. That's what you're trying to do. It has to do with cost savings, time, market share. You're just looking for ways to be a better company. And a better company is going to be more profitable and more creative.
Which to me defines success. So people listening don't think this is all about the big corporations, and Hank uses these corporations. Yes, he's addressing their issues, but many times, and I've been able to do this for myself and my clients, take what happens in a big company and bring it down and look at your own small company. Quick story. This past Friday, I'm in a barbershop. Guy who cuts my hair is the owner, and he's got 3 other people working for him. They were getting ready to close the shop at the end of the day and go to a community event together. And he made a comment, and he said, "Man, I'm tired. I don't want to, this and that." He was telling me, about it was for raising money for a baseball team, little league team or something. And one of the other barbers, a lady, she overheard what he said. He says, "Wait a minute, you need to get up for this. This is a company event." And he says, "Well, I wondered, y'all are getting all fixed up, doing their hair and everything because everybody had left but me." And she reiterated, she says, "No, I represent the company. And I'm going to this dinner." It was a dinner and an auction. And he had bought a table and took the people to work with him.
And she's now 3 times better a barber and seen as such by the customers, to where she wouldn't consider going somewhere else. And that barber and beauty shops are constantly recruiting people with books of business, the same way law firms and accounting firms create additional revenue stream by going after people that are known from other companies. It's just, we in business want to do work that we're proud of. That's the other issue. One of my other chapters in the books covers the 20 things that people do, why people work, why they do good work. And money and getting paid for your time is only one of the 20. The rest have to do with pride and workmanship, association with a company that occasionally does good guy things in the community. Again, none of us are in business to give it all away, but when we do, we want to make it count. And what do we really give away most of the time? Our valuable time and our expertise. I used to serve on boards of nonprofits anymore. I don't do that anymore. I go and speak to and advise those boards so they'll realize how to be better board members. We've all got talents. We all give talents. And as you know, the last time I was on the show a couple of years ago talking about my book, Nonprofit Legends, nonprofits often, and what they do, become the face of the company. Certain companies get associated with certain causes, and it's the art and the skill with which they turn it into business. There are people in the business community, small businesses in the greater Houston area, whose business is benefited because they were so visible during Hurricane Harvey, helping neighbors who turned into customers.
Right, and there's a certain element of sincerity in that you have to produce when you do that. But my story about the barbershop, I don't want anybody listening to this video cast, live presentation, and to discount the fact that your business is too small. That in this case, the working owner, 3 employees, and one of those employees in particular spoke out and said, "I care. I am going to be representing the company at this event." So it is important. If you have one employee, particularly one or more, make sure that you've got them right, the right person, the right job, all the things we've talked about today, because it does pay off, because they are a public face of your company in particular situations. So let's talk about, Hank, if we can, you talk about change And we talked about it early on in our first of the series, and how people in general, of course, you and I agree, we don't know the psychological, but people object to change. But I have a business and I want to grow that business, which means I have to have change. That's just built in. No way to do it otherwise. How can I, as a small business person, how would you recommend that I manage change in the most effective way?
For one thing, you have a part of your plan that deals with the changes. What a company, one of the biggest problems that a lot of companies have is they're changing too fast. Situations out there are changing too fast, out of their control. You need to be able to manage. Research tells us that 66.7% of companies cannot grow any further than they are now. And so unbridled change for the sake of growth, you look at companies that have, they've merged with someone else and maybe the merger didn't work out and maybe it was time to spin off. And sometimes you've got to be prepared to change. I worked with some companies that were better off as part of a roll-up than they were working together. I had a lot of friends who, during a certain period of time, they're in an industry called analytical instruments. Every chemical plant is guided by analytical instruments. And what started happening was chemists who were on staff were creating these technologies, and next thing you know, they were in businesses to provide those to companies that they had retired from working at. And then at some point, we had to realize, and I had to help make them realize, that their business was no longer making tubes and boxes. It was becoming a consulting organization. And I said to these people, they were chemists of the old school, oh, we're scientists, and we tell people how to utilize our technology. I said, no, they're going to respect you more if you charge them how to do it. I don't think Arthur Andersen gives their work away for free. I don't think that, some of these technology groups, I had been involved with Hewlett-Packard in creating their technology arm. And then it got spun off into its own thing. People just need to realize that the growth that you're enjoying is not going to last. It's going to change. And it may get to where it's too much growth and you've got to know when to back off, when to, certain mergers aren't going to work, or occasionally what products to spin off. One of those analytical companies, we had to realize that we had to split our products into different companies. The ones that had to do with oil and gas and liquefaction and all of that became one company, and then everything that had to do with water and downstream flow of all that then became a separate thing. And and it all started because I said, you guys are too complicated and too big. It's now time to break into smaller companies. And they were kind of relieved getting that advice, and these were not large corporations. A lot of them were mom and pop type companies, and it was a relief knowing that maybe it was time to try something different. The change was happening whether they wanted it or not.
Right.
And part of the change was them being too big, needing to get smaller.
Yeah, and I can imagine that is a major, major change, so to speak. One of the things you talk about in your books, and you and I have talked about, is customer service. And of course, that topic gets kicked around in almost every business meeting, or not business, but I mean in any kind of business group where business people are just discussing their business. It's always a complaint about can't find people to deliver the service, whatever. It's at an all-time low. How can it be reinfused back into business? How can we truly change our customer service other than complaining about it?
Well, is for one thing to take the focus away from, oh, that's so-and-so down the hall. That's their job to do that. Those kids that are sitting there on those phone lines, they're at that call center, that's their job. No, there needs to be a customer focus, customer service mentality in everybody's job description. I would like to see, and I've written about that in the books too. By the way, I mean, there's a formula to these books. There's something about each of these topics in each book. And, whereas some people only write about one of those topics in their book, I'm trying to write about them from the big picture perspective. In my professional opinion, customer service in our society is an all-time low, and it's getting worse. And part of it is because there's a presumption that somebody down the hall, that's their problem, that's their issue. I think that every employee of a small business needs to have their own strategic plan. And if their job description talks about, I will be more successful when I have contributed to the customer status of our company, I will be successful. And then they will talk in the job description. I advocate what's called a performance review-oriented description. It's not one I thought up. It's some very smart HR people have thought it up. But it basically ties every decision to a customer outcome. The current management philosophy in business, the problem with a lot of people in business is there are usually two management styles behind. Some of the larger corporations are still living in the captain of industry style of business, which went out of style. That management style went out in the 1920s. The current management style is called customer-focused management. There's a chapter about that in the book. And it takes the premise that every management decision needs to be tied to a customer outcome, so that no longer is customer service dial and smile down the hall or something that we farm out to India. It's something that every business decision factors in. And you start talking about customer outcomes with a company. What about companies that we're trying to acquire or team with? What about everybody in our supply chain? In total quality management, we talk about the seamlessness of the business offering and the experience, meaning that every supplier and vendor who works with you should be on the same page. I just recently spoke back in March, and I was the opening keynote at the International Total Quality Management Conference, and this year it was held in San Antonio. And what the message was, quality is not just something that's role and function. It's not just something where you look at numbers and judge productivity based on somebody's metrics. It's how did those people come to refer business back to you? How did you get people? Everyone wants likes on the internet. Everyone wants recognition. What are you doing to get those reviews symbolically as part of your corporate culture? And the more you think about it and plan about it, you're gonna do that. You know who I think does that probably very well is the nonprofit community. I wrote about that when I did that book. I think, and I said when I was talking about that subject on the show a couple of years ago, if small businesses would be more nonprofit-esque and nonprofits would be more business-like, and that there was somehow a marrying of the two, it would be unbeatable. And meaning that small business has a heart and soul of doing well. We have, one of the things that Silver Fox is that we've done is we've judged in that Better Business Bureau Awards program. And I've judged about 30 different awards programs for different organizations over the years, including the Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award. And I find as a judge, and I know that you've judged those entries before, every time you read one, you learn something. Every time you learn something, it gives you an educational idea that you can impart to a client. Sometimes we teach people what we've most recently learned. Your best ideas come from something you just learned, and you just can't wait to teach it to other people. I learned that when I was 12 years old, and the person I learned it from was Eleanor Roosevelt. You teach people what you most recently learned. But when you think of the broader issue of customer service, how it's the umbrella to everything. It's part of the big picture of business. It's not just a subset of branch 5, business development. And you think of it that, then you think of all the other parts, components. You can't have good customer service without having good products, good logistics, good follow through. I was involved with a group. I give these case studies. Obviously, I don't talk about the bad ones that don't listen to me. But I was working with a group of trucking companies, and they were part of a national association. With the explosion of the internet and just-in-time deliveries and all of that, someone has to deliver all those packages. They're not all delivered by drones, and they're not all delivered by Amazon. So the importance is all of those local trucking and logistics companies started putting their resources together. And how can we be better at delivering what we're doing? I was conducting a management retreat for them down in Atlanta, Georgia, and I gave them this barrage of suggestions. Why are we surprised of that? And one of the things I said was, why can't anybody go on your website and get pricing? If I can go on a utility company's website and get comparisons of rates, for electricity, why can't you tell people what it costs to ship packages? Your competitors can, USPS can, Amazon can. Why can't you? Oh, we never thought of it. That's customer-focused management. And then we did more research and found out that customers had been begging them just because some guy shows up for a seminar and is helping them with ideas. I later found out that other people had made the same suggestions. No one listened to them. So those are those issues. Customer-focused management is not just a management style, it's a mantra.
Well, we're winding down in this series.
Yeah.
I appreciate all the time you've devoted to us and
Yeah.
really carried us from soup to nuts.
OneBestConsult.com, a community of small business owners where you as an owner can find answers to the most pressing business questions you have. Not sure who to turn to when you have a challenge in your business? Turn to the folks at OneBestConsult.com. That's the number one, bestconsult.com, where you can always find advice you can use based on common sense business experience. Join our community of like-minded business owners at OneBestConsult.com.